In accordance with Standing Order 43, the time for members' statements has concluded. Questions without notice. The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Can the Prime Minister confirm his colleague, the Liberal member for Gilmore, was describing government policy when she said it's a gift for our young people that their penalty rates have been cut?
Member for Gilmore. Member for Gilmore. The member for Gilmore will cease in. The member for Gilmore. Member for Gilmore will cease interjecting. The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The member for Gilmore is a hard-working federal member who represents an electorate which includes many areas of high unemployment.
The member for Whitlam.
And many areas where there is youth unemployment. And what she knows is that the decision of the Fair Work Commission will enable more small businesses to open on weekends, which will provide more job opportunities for young people. Now, none of us are going to take the Leader of the Opposition's version of what the honourable member has said as gospel. The honourable member, before she became a member in this House, was a school teacher for years. She knows, we've all been with her in her electorate, she knows the situation of young people in the electorate of Gilmore very well, and it's very heartfelt. But, Mr Speaker, the reality is
the Minister for Energy and the Environment,
that the basis of the Fair Work Commission's decision, a decision that was taken following a reference from the Leader of the Opposition, was that the reduction in penalty rates would create more opportunities for employment. That was Ian Ross's rationale for the decision, and of course the hypocrisy of the Labor Party in suggesting that penalty rates can never be varied flies in the face of one enterprise agreement after another, including many signed by the Leader of the Opposition. I have the Clean Event Agreement, Mr Speaker. That one says this agreement is intended to be comprehensive and excludes any protected conditions in an award, including penalty rates. So there you go. That's just one. And there's a long list of them, dozens and dozens of them. Mr Speaker, let me look at the comparison between big business and small business. This is a very important issue. Now, we stand for small business. Labor invariably lines up with big business. How is it that a small takeaway business pays $29.16 on a Sunday for an employee under the award, whereas McDonald's down the street can pay $21.08 for the same worker doing the same work? Why? Because they've done a deal with the union. And what about
Prime Minister resume his seat. The Leader of the Opposition will resume his seat for a second. Leader of the Opposition will resume his seat. Members on both sides will cease interjecting. The member for Gorton's warned, as is the member for Lindsay. I refer members to my remarks at the opening of Parliament today. I refer them to the member for Lindsay. That is your last interjection. I refer members to my remarks earlier today and my remarks yesterday. I'll take action very swiftly. Well, the member for Whitlam and the member for Barton can just work out when they want me to give the Leader of the Opposition the call. Leader of the Opposition, on a point of order.
Yes, relevance, Mr Speaker. This pay cut isn't a gift, it's an insult to 700,000
The Leader of the Opposition will
Australians.
resume his seat. And on that note, I should also point out, having anticipated this, points of order are becoming statements. There's leniency given to the Leader and the Prime Minister and the Manager of Opposition Business and the Leader of the House. I'm not going to allow points of order to be taken frivolously. The Prime Minister is completely in order and on the topic of the question. Points of order are not to be used for an additional statement to be added to a question.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. What about the insult signed here by Bill Shorten, National Secretary, Australian Workers' Union,
Member for Sydney's
to
warned.
an EBA
Member
which
for Bendigo
provides
will leave under
no
94A.
additional penalty rate shall be applicable, Cirque du Soleil, traded away. One of many where Labor leaders, Labor union organisers have traded away penalty rates
The
for
Prime
the workers
Minister's
they
time
seek to represent.
has expired. The member for Petrie.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister please update the House on how the government is backing Australian households and businesses like Embrace Life, a small business employing 13 people in North Lakes, along with other local businesses, by putting downward pressure on electricity prices in my electorate of Petrie?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for his question. He knows very well, as a former businessman, small businessman in his electorate, in his community, he knows how tough competition is. He knows how businesses have to ensure that they can keep all of their costs under control, and how essential energy is to every business. And if energy prices keep rising, as they have done, that puts pressure on the business, and invariably jobs will go. We heard that yesterday in Hume, not far from here too, where business after business talked about the pressure they're facing from rising energy costs. And the effect is direct, and it is on competitiveness, and it's on employment. And employers, as a consequence, start laying workers off. Now, we know that Australian businesses, just like Australian families, need affordable and reliable electricity. Now, Mr Speaker, what we've seen from the Labor Party is an addiction to ideology which has sent them to set targets, a 50% renewable target, which they have no idea of how to implement. All we know is that in South Australia, where you have had 40% renewables and a target to go to 50, you have the most expensive and the least reliable electricity in Australia. And this is a state where they are seeking more investment, more employment, and they have provided, this Labor government there, in an absolute demonstration of what Labor would do nationally, have created the worst possible climate for business, the most expensive and the least reliable electricity in Australia. No wonder the head of their Chamber of Commerce in South Australia said South Australia is the canary in the coal mine. It demonstrates what's coming up next if the Labor Party is going to be allowed to continue. And Mr Speaker, what we've seen now is the way you've got the CFMEU, who you would think would be supporting a rational approach to energy, given so many of their workers work in mining, nonetheless lining up with the Labor Party to attack the government, claiming that we're responsible for a decision by the independent umpire, making that claim. Why? Because all they seek to do, just like they got the Leader of the Opposition to switch on the Fair Work Commission, just like they got him to switch on penalty rates, so now they want to back him in to abolish the Building and Construction Commission, so that yet again the CFMEU, the owners of the Leader of the Opposition, can dominate and oppress small businesses across Australia.
The member for Bruce.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Does government policy agree with the member for Chisholm, who told Christina Keneally on Sky Today that she would be telling her electorate the decision to cut penalty rates for 700,000 Australians is a good thing?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, Mr Speaker, again, we won't take members opposite as reliable stenographers for the statements from the government members. But the reality is that the honourable member opposite would well know that those 5 Labor appointees on the Fair Work Commission, every single one of which was appointed by a Labor government, by his leader, the member for Maribyrnong, the leader of the opposition. They were all appointed by the Labor Party. And the President, Mr Ross, spent his life working for the ACTU. The reference was delivered to them by the Labor Party. He heard thousands of pages of evidence, hundreds of witnesses, and came to the conclusion that a reduction in Sunday penalty rates and of the level proposed would increase employment. That was the considered decision of the Fair Work Commission, and we accept that decision. We support the decision of the independent umpire because it's their decision. You either support
Members
the
on my
independent
left.
umpire or you do not. We support the independent umpire, and we support the independent umpire whether it is the courts or whether it is the Fair Work Commission. And what the Labor Party is doing is endeavouring to walk away from a commitment over many years, many decades, to supporting the independent umpire's decision. Now, that decision is one that was carefully considered, and honourable members opposite need to look at what they have done in practice. In EBA after EBA around the nation, in fact 80%, I understand from Mr Strong, the Chief Executive of COSBAR, 80% of retail workers in Australia on Shop Distributive and Allied Trades Awards are working on Sundays at penalty rates lower than those set by the Fair Work Commission. So that's the fact. So that
Members
is the
on
fact.
my right.
So if it's good enough for the Shop Distributive and Allied Trades Union, if it's good enough for the shoppers, if it's good enough for the AWU, if it's good enough for them, why are those opposite condemning the decision of the independent umpire, the members of which they appointed, the decisions of which they said they would support. They appointed it, they established it, they've claimed they support independent umpires in industrial matters, and now they are walking away from it, undermining, as Jenny George said, a fundamental element in the industrial relations system.
The member for Corangamite will cease interjecting, as will the member for Lalor, and the member for Adelaide is warned. The member for O'Connor.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And my question is to the Treasurer. Will the Treasurer update the House on how the budget is supporting hard-working Australian families by bringing the budget back to balance? How does a strong budget boost confidence and stability in the national economy?
The Treasurer has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for O'Connor for his question. Like me, he'll be pleased to know that for the last 41 weeks consumer confidence has been above the long-run average now. 41 weeks, that is one of the longest runs we've seen since 2011, and it's important, Mr Speaker, that we continue to provide that confidence in the economy, and key to that is returning the budget to balance. Now, a strong budget ensures that a government can guarantee the support for services that hard-working Australians and their families rely on, whether it's Medicare, whether it's hospitals, whether it's schools, whether it's the PBS or any of these measures. You need a strong budget supported by a strong economy to guarantee that those services that we enjoy today will be there in the future, and they'll be there for future generations. Without a strong budget, that is not something that can be guaranteed. Secondly, Mr Speaker, a strong budget ensures that we can protect against the economic shocks that are present in a volatile global economy. We know the value of that strength of the budget when the previous Howard Costello government ensured a strong budget which put Australia in a strong place to withstand the global economic shocks of the late 2000s, Mr Speaker. Now, the government is working to return the budget to balance by getting expenditure under control. Now, when we came to government in 2013, Mr Speaker, this is our priority, getting expenditure under control. Expenditure was growing under Labor at a rate, according to PIFO, of 3.5% a year. 3.5% a year, and debt was growing at a rate of 34%. 34%. Now, Since that time, Mr Speaker, we have been able to reduce the growth in debt by 2/3, and we've been able to ensure that expenditure is growing now at less than 2%. So we are getting expenditure under control and we are getting the growth in debt under control. Now, that has been well received not only by the ratings agencies that confirmed Australia's AAA credit rating, all three of them in December at the time of the mid-year statement, but it has also been reinforced by global debt markets who understand that the strong financial management of this side of the House is worth investing in. We had 3 exceptional bond issuances over the last few months. In October of last year, $7.6 billion on the first 30-year bond at a yield of 3.27%. A second bond issuance in January of this year of $9.3 billion with a subscription of over $15 billion. And thirdly, the most successful syndicated bond issuance by an Australian government just recently on the 23rd of February for some $11 billion with bids at over $20 billion, Mr Speaker. This is a government whose strong financial management is being rewarded by the vote of confidence not only by Australian consumers but international debt markets.
The member for Blaxland has the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. The Trade Minister said today about people impacted by the cuts to penalty rates, and I quote, "It's only those on the margins." Why does this government think that a wage cut of up to $77 a week for nearly 700,000 low-paid Australian workers is just a marginal issue?
Members on my right, the Prime Minister has the call.
I thank the honourable member for his question. The fact remains that the honourable members opposite have walked away from a commitment to the independent umpire in the industrial relations system. And I would quote, let me quote this passage from Bill Shorten, Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations, in 2012, for the honourable member's benefit. From the Adelaide Advertiser, no less. Under the Fair Go workplace system Labor put in place, penalty rates in modern awards are set by the independent umpire. Fair Work Australia, after extensive consultation with employer representatives and unions, the Tribunal is currently holding a major check-up of the operation of penalty rates and public holidays in modern award rates. Well, he knew all about that because he'd given them the brief to do it. Employers, he goes on to say, employees and their representatives are able to appear before the independent umpire and put their views forward. That's a fair system, one that balances the rights of employers to make a profit with the rights of employees to fair treatment. So spoke Bill Shorten, Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations, the author of this Fair Work Commission decision. No individual in this parliament had more to do with setting up that review of modern awards and penalty rates than the Leader of the Opposition. He owns it. It's his process. Is he seriously suggesting that it never occurred to him that any of these penalty rates would be reduced? Does he seriously expect us to believe that the Fair Work Commission was going to increase them when, in agreement after agreement, he reduced them? He was a master, an absolute Olympic champion in reducing penalty rates as part of enterprise bargaining agreements. He knew exactly what the debate was. He knew exactly what the contention was. He set the review up. He stood by the independent umpire. In fact, he was standing by the independent umpire until January this year.
Member for Barker.
When, according to the member for McMahon, he had consultations and changed his mind. What he had was a direction from his proprietors, the CFMEU and the other heavies in the trade union movement. They pulled him back, and he's doing as he's told. He has betrayed a lifetime of commitment to the independent umpire. Jenny George held him to account, and she was right to do so.
Just before I call the member for Denison, thank the member for Denison, just resume his seat for a second. I inform the House we have present in the gallery this afternoon a parliamentary delegation from Norway, led by Ms Tone Skogen, Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs. On behalf of the House, I extend a very warm welcome to you and to the delegation. And we also have present in the gallery this afternoon Grant Tambling, a former senator and a former member for this House. Good to see you back and welcome. The member for Denison.
Thank you, Speaker. Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, I met recently with Darryl Gangel, who's now lost his part pension and must live on just $26,000 a year from his superannuation. This is barely above the poverty line. I've also met with defined benefit superannuants who have also had their pensions slashed and are also struggling. Prime Minister, the government is doing no better with aged care, despite my repeated representations, and in particular it's gutted funding for residential care to the tune of $1.2 billion. Prime Minister, what will you do to end this ruthless campaign against older Australians?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for his question. Every government has a solemn duty to care for our elderly. It's a duty, a responsibility that we take very seriously and always have done. We're spending $45 billion this financial year supporting aged pensioners, as we should. In 2015, the government made difficult decisions in regards to the aged pensions. You know, they were legislated in June 2015. They were decisions made in the national interest to protect both current and future generations of Australians, to make sure the pension is both available and sustainable. Now, in 2007, when the government was banking surpluses and had billions of dollars in the bank, the asset test was made more generous. That decision was changed, as I said, around 18 months ago, in the middle of 2015. Times had changed and we had to live within our means, and that was the tough decision that was taken by the government, by the coalition government, and it was supported by the Labor Party, passed through the parliament. In the 2016 election, there was support from the government, from Labor and the Greens for this change. And despite the Labor Party now complaining about the measure, they have no plans to do anything about it. Now, I'm not aware of Mr Gangel's full circumstances, but if the honourable member wishes to raise them with me or with the minister, we can certainly look into them. But the changes only affect individuals with significant levels of assets other than the family home, and I'm sure the honourable member is aware of that. Now, with an ageing population and significant and growing pressure on the budget, the expectation is that people will draw down on their assets to support themselves in retirement where they can. So pensioners would have to draw down a maximum of about 1.8% of their assets to make up for the loss of their part pension. Now, we're working hard to give Australians greater choice in aged care, with funding growing each and every year. The minister announced a very significant reform this week, increasing choice in home care, which puts funding in the hands of consumers for the first time. It gives more people more control over the delivery of their home care services, allowing them to choose the best service provider for their needs. So we are grateful for the contribution older Australians have made to our country throughout their lives, and we will always work and always have worked to ensure older Australians are treated with dignity and with respect.
The member for Capricornia.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Agriculture and Water Resources. Will the Deputy Prime Minister update the House on how the government is ensuring the continued growth in Australia's cattle industry? Is the Deputy Prime Minister aware of any threats in this industry and the thousands of hard-working Australians it employs, including cold storage operators in Queensland?
The Deputy Prime Minister has the call.
Well, Mr Speaker, I thank the honourable member for a question, and she would know more than most about the cattle industry. a cattle industry that employs over up to 8,000 people in an area. Rockhampton, the Fitzroy region, is about 2.4 million cattle. Beef cattle accounts for about 75% of all farms. And what we see that beef cattle is forecast to top $12.5 billion of our record $60 billion agricultural production this year. We will see that $8.3 billion worth of that production will go overseas. That's almost double what it was under the Labor Party, who were absolutely hopeless as far as the cattle industry is concerned. And what we noted is we're supporting not only in the cattle industry but the Beef Expo in Rockhampton, which is definitely the beef capital of Queensland, and that we can argue it out with Kevin Hogan as to whether it's the beef capital of Australia. But what's important is that we are working even this week. This week, the member for Capricornia will be pleased to know that in negotiations with the Indonesians, we've managed to increase those that go off in the live cattle trade from 350 kilograms to 450 kilograms. This means there's an extra 100 kilograms, and at around about $3+ a kilogram, it means for each beast, the farmer will be getting an extra $300, $320 a head. That's a great outcome. We've also increased the age limit so that they go up to from 30 months up to 48 months. So up to 4 years. This is also another good outcome because it gives us a wider range of cattle that are available for the live export trade, as well as what we're doing with the permit system, taking it from 4 months to 12 months. This is all part of negotiations which is done with the coalition, and we did it in the same breath as we did when we negotiated a reduction in the sugar tariff. I know the member for Dawson is very interested in that, from 8% down to 5%. But of course you do these things because you're in government. But there are some threats. There are definitely some threats. And probably one of the biggest threats, of course, is that it's a big employer, and as a big employer, one of the biggest food stocks of how you actually run an abattoir is labour costs and electricity costs. And of course, on electricity costs, the Labor Party, the Australian Labor Party, is trying to mimic what's happening in South Australia across the nation. And this is disastrous. This is disastrous. Because the member for Capricornia would know that with international organisations such as JBS, SWIFT and Cargill Tees in there, when they go to expand production, they look at the cost of imports such as electricity. And it's amazing that the Labor Party doesn't seem to stand up for labourers anymore. They don't have any labourers. I don't believe, member of Capricornia, that we've got one meat worker that resides on the Labor Party benches. They just don't exist. They're university students, they're union officials, but they're not actually workers. They've never actually done a day's work. Not a day's work, because what they are, they're people who've been clerks, they've been union officials. He's one. He's never done a day's work.
The Deputy Prime Minister will resume his seat. The member for Wakefield isn't hearing me warn him yet again. The member for Eden Monero will cease interjecting. The member for Lindsay will leave under 94A. I can only say it so often. And the Manager of Opposition Business has the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is under Standing Order 99. My question is to the member for Bowman as Chair of the Standing Committee on Employment, Education and Training, and I refer to the committee's current inquiry into the future labour force. As part of this inquiry, and noting paragraph 6 of the inquiry's terms of reference allowing it to examine other related matters, will the committee hold public hearings into the impact of the decision to cut penalty rates on the future labour force?
Just before I'll call the Leader of the House. Yeah, Leader of the House. Leader of the House on a point of order.
Mr Speaker, the precedents with respect to these matters are very clear, and questions to backbenchers in terms of being chairman of committees are very, very, very narrow and very strict, and have almost always been ruled out by the Speaker, and I'd ask you to rule out this question on this occasion.
I'll hear from the Manager of Opposition Business.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. The Leader of the House has forgotten a question that his side asked to the member for Holt in a previous parliament.
The member for McEwen is warned. You can appreciate members on both sides expecting me to listen to both the Manager of Opposition Business and the Leader of the House. It's not an everyday question. I'd like to listen to them both, if that's okay.
Mr Speaker, the question refers specifically and only to the work of the committee and a current inquiry referring specifically to the terms of reference of that inquiry. Every requirement under Standing Order 99 has been kept to. I deliberately have not gone to his Sky News interview today. It would have been a better question, but it would not have been in order.
I'll hear from the Leader of the House again.
Mr Speaker, questions to anyone in this House, and obviously to ministers usually, need to be within their powers. And the member for Bowman cannot answer a question about whether the committee will hold public hearings into the penalty rates decision, because that is a decision for the committee, not for the chairman.
I'll hear again from the Manager of Opposition Business. I'm listening.
Yeah.
And,
Mr Speaker, Standing Order 99 specifically says when it says you can ask a question to a member who is not a minister.
The Minister for Health and Sport is warned.
But it must relate to a bill, motion or other business of the House or a committee for which the member is asked is responsible. If the chair of a committee is not responsible for the committee, it's a really strange committee.
OK, now I'm ready to rule on the matter, and I've obviously surveyed this ground before, although not in question time. Certainly, chairs of committee can be asked questions strictly about the process of their committee. The Leader of the House raises the point in the question from the Manager of Opposition Business about whether the committee will hold hearings or not. I think that does go to the process of the committee. What the decision-making for that is a matter, frankly, for the member answering it. And I am going to allow the question. The member for Bowman. And he needs to confine himself just to the process as chair of the committee.
As it is to do, I shall, Speaker, follow your recommendation. And to the opposition member, thank you for the question. This is not a matter that has been brought yet to the committee, and rightly should be a decision for the committee to consider at the next time that they are meeting, which I understand is in the next sitting week. We have already arranged for public hearings around the country. Written submissions have closed, but as I've said, this is firmly a matter for our committee to consider.
The member for Grey.
Give him another one. Give him another one.
Member for Grey has the call.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is for the Minister for Defence Industry. When the Minister outlined to the House why the unreliable and expensive electricity is a threat to the success of the defence industry as well as other industries in South Australia like Spring Gully Foods.
The Minister for Defence Industry has the call.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Grey for his question, because I know that he, like me and all South Australians, are deeply concerned about the effect of Labor's obsession with renewable energy at the expense of all other kinds of power, the effect of that on the economy in South Australia, and the very real risk that that obsession has for the rest of the nation should the state-based renewable energy targets spread their tentacles across Australia in the way that it has in South Australia, so damaging the jobs, the investment and the economy of a state that needs everything going for it and not hurdles put in its path, Mr Speaker. So we've seen the impact already of Labor's obsession with renewable energy rather than an all-of-the-above approach to power generation in the defence portfolio, because the Defence Department will need to spend $20 million building a diesel power generation capacity at Osborne to do the naval shipbuilding plan that we have put in place. 9 future frigates, 12 offshore patrol vessels, 12 submarines, Mr Speaker. This is an economy-changing, generational-changing commitment to the South Australian economy that the South Australian Labor Party has put at risk because of their approach to energy pricing and causing the prices in South Australia to be highest in the country and the reliability to be the worst in the country. So we are putting $20 million of taxpayers' money into helping to fix that problem. But it's not just defence industry that is suffering in South Australia because of Labor and their policies towards energy. Businesses like Spring Gully
which would be very well known to the South Australians in this House, because 4 years ago, Spring Gully, which makes foods and jams and preservatives and bottles, other people's as well, went into voluntary administration because they were going out of business. And the South Australian community got behind Spring Gully because it's a family-owned business. I think it's in its 4th generation in terms of a family-owned business, and saved that business for the future. And yet Spring Gully is facing bleak times again, Mr Speaker, because of the energy prices and the unreliability in the South Australian economy of power. Kevin Webb, who is well known to many people, says in The Australian today that the prices in the last 12 months have gone from $85,000 to $150,000 a year for power generation for Spring Gully Foods. He says there was little margin for wearing higher power costs, and it's not going to get any better. With Port Augusta closing down last year, the reliability is just not there, and with the renewables, the model isn't working. So it's time for the Labor Party to take their blinkers off and support the common-sense, all-of-the-above approach of the Turnbull government.
The Manager of Opposition Business.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. In question time a few moments ago, the Prime Minister said that he supported the penalty rates decision. He also said we support the independent
Opposition
umpire,
Business will
whether
resume
it
his
is the courts
seat.
or
Manager Opposition Business will just resume his seat for a second. Members on both sides will cease interjecting. As I've said many times, they expect me to hear the question if they want me to rule on it. The member for Hunter, perhaps he's sitting close to the door for a reason. I want to hear the Manager of Opposition Business in silence. The Manager of Opposition Business will begin his question again.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. In question time a few moments ago, the Prime Minister said that he supported the penalty rates decision, and he also said we support the independent umpire, whether it is the courts or whether it is the Fair Work Commission. Given this Parliament regularly changes the law following decisions of the courts or tribunals when they were not what the government wanted, including when the government abolished the Road Safety Remuneration Tribunal, and noting legislation is doing exactly that on native title before the Senate now, is the reason the Prime Minister refuses to act in this instance simply because he supports the pay cut?
The Minister for Urban Infrastructure will cease interjecting. The Prime Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker, I thank the honourable member for his question, and if I may answer it with a quotation from his leader on the 16th of May 2016. And there's some very fine video of this, I understand. It was in a doorstop in Geelong, and he was lecturing the Greens. The member for Melbourne will note this. He said, the Leader of the Opposition said, at this stage the Greens were proposing some legislation, a private member's bill, which would prevent any change to penalty rates by the Fair Work Commission. And so this is what the Leader of the Opposition said, not so long ago, May 2016. I do also just caution the Greens from their sideshow position. He's clearly joined the sideshow himself now. From their sideshow position, that they need to be careful of what they're playing with fire by proposing that a government should be able to legislate on specific penalty rate outcomes. They are loading the gun for a future Conservative government to pull the trigger, because what the government has the power to put in, a future government has the power to dismantle. The independent umpire, the system of conciliation and arbitration, has served this nation well for 120 years. Bill Shorten, doorstop interview, Geelong, 16 May 2016. What a change. Now, Mr Speaker, we support the independent umpire. We accept their decisions. And as to the question of the precise merits of each decision, let me answer this question in a very practical way that the honourable member, as a former organiser for the Shoppers Union, would understand very well. He knows very well the enormous advantage that the SDA has been able to achieve for large businesses. Here's a fact. Here's a real fact to bear in mind. A person working in a dress shop, clothing shop, is entitled to be paid $38.88 an hour on a Sunday as a shop assistant. If they're working for Target just down the road, they can be paid $31.02 an hour. Why? Because there's been a deal done with the union. The union, of which the member for Watson was an organiser, has traded away their penalty rights, their penalty rates, and doing so in a manner that disadvantages small business. Now, this was a complex decision, a very complex decision, thousands of pages. It was properly dealt with by the independent umpire, and we support the independent umpire. So did the Leader of the Opposition until he was given his orders by the union bosses.
Time has expired. The member for Ryan and the member for Hume will not interject. The member for Brisbane has the call.
My question is to the Minister for Immigration and Border Protection. Will the minister update the House on the action the government's taking to protect Brisbane families and indeed all Australian families from dangerous non-citizens, including criminal gang members, and is the minister aware of any alternative approaches?
The Minister for Immigration and Border Protection.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Can I say thank you very much to the member for Brisbane, and like all members on this side of the House, he can be assured that through the actions of this government we are making communities across the country safer. We went to the last election, Mr Speaker, saying that we would secure our borders, because if you cannot secure your borders, you cannot provide security and safety to Australian families. And this government stopped boats, we stopped drownings at sea, we stopped people going into detention, including children. There were 17 detention centres, Mr Speaker, that we closed, and we cleaned up Labor's mess. Labor is still divided and dysfunctional when it comes to border protection policy, and indeed when it comes to immigration policy. They presided over a failed program. We have restored integrity to that program, Mr Speaker, and this government will continue to make the tough decisions that are in the best interests of our country. We will make decisions that will make Australians safer. For example, Mr Speaker, I have cancelled the visas of over 2,000 non-citizens, which over the course of the last 2 years is up by 1,200% in the case of visa cancellations and 425% in relation to refusal on character grounds for those visas to be issued. Now, the Labor Party, when it was in government, and there are members on this front bench of the Shorten opposition that were issuing visas to outlaw motorcycle gang members when they were ministers for immigration in the Rudd-Gillard-Rudd years, the glory years as the Labor Party refers to them, the glory years of the Rudd-Gillard-Rudd period. Now, we have cancelled, Mr Speaker, the visas of 138 non-citizens who have been involved in outlaw motorcycle gangs. Now, why have we taken that stance but the Labor Party didn't? Well, we know that the CFMEU and other unions use the bikies to this very day as muscle on building sites to bash carpenters and to bash tilers, because that's the way the CFMEU do their work, and the CFMEU donate millions and millions of dollars to this Leader of the Opposition and this Labor Party. And the fact is that the CFMEU owns and operates to this very day the Australian Labor Party, and the Australian public will not forget this, Mr Speaker, at the next election. But we have kicked out those bikies because we're not interested in seeing them employed in illegitimate industries.
The Minister for Immigration and Border Protection will resume his seat. The member for Moreton on a point of order.
Thank you, Speaker. I draw your attention to Standing Order 90, inflections on members, and I would suggest that the minister is going very, very close in terms of suggesting an improper.
The member for Moreton will resume his seat. The member for Fadden will leave under 94A. Member for Wills can join him in a second. Just before I call the minister, the member for Moreton, I agree with the member for Moreton. He's going close, but he's in order. The minister has the call.
That was the idea, Mr Speaker. Thank you very much. Now, the point here is, Mr Speaker, the outlaw motorcycle gangs in this country are the biggest distributors of ice and amphetamines. They are involved in extortion, They are involved in criminal activity, which includes criminal activity on building sites. The ALP has nothing to say about that at all, and it is a complete and utter disgrace. And this government is not going. This government, Mr. Speaker, is not going to be deterred on our mission. We are going to continue to cancel those visas, and I'd welcome
the Leader of the Opposition has the call.
My question's to the Prime Minister. Can the Prime Minister explain to the House why, when company profits have increased by almost $26 billion to record levels, he wants to cut company tax? And when there is record low wages growth, he does nothing to stop wage cuts of up to $77 a week for Australians. Prime Minister, why is it when profits are surging, companies get more, and when wages are flat, workers get even less under your government?
The Leader of the House and the Minister for Immigration and Border Protection. The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The honourable member, there was a time when the honourable member was a persuasive, indeed passionate advocate for reducing business taxes. And he stood here and he said, if you reduce company tax, you increase investment, you increase productivity and you increase employment. And if you do that, of course, businesses will grow, they will be more profitable, and you'll see an increase in company tax receipts. And indeed that has been the experience in Australia. As we have seen reductions in company tax, we've seen growth in investment, more profitability, more employment and more receipts. And that was well understood by the Labor Party when they recognised there was a connection between investment and employment. But economics has been thrown out the window. We are now in a parallel populist universe of the Leader of the Opposition, where apparently there is no connection between the rate of tax companies pay and what they invest. That's La-La Land. Another part of La-La Land says that you can stop trading with other countries and that you can be a protectionist. Mr. Speaker, what we're doing on our side of the House is working hard every day to open up more export opportunities for Australian businesses. Only on the weekend we've secured more access to Indonesia, our closest neighbour, an enormous economy, growing at a rapid rate, going to be one of the biggest economies in the world before very long. We've secured more access for sugar, more access for live cattle, and we are working towards and have a commitment to concluding a free trade agreement by the end of the year. But all we get from the opposition is rants about protectionism. That's what they want. They want to throw up the barriers and put Australians out of work. And the fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, the wages share of income improves, continues to improve in Australia. We know that the biggest beneficiaries from reducing business taxes is our workers, our wages. That was set out, the rationale for that was set out in a Labor Party budget in 2010. Treasury analysis, the analysis is still right. You reduce company tax, you get more investment, you get more investment, you get more jobs. There was a time when the Labor Party cared about jobs, not any longer. There was a time when they cared about hard-working Australian families and wanted to help them get ahead, no longer. Well, we do. We're committed to growth and we're committed to backing those Australians to succeed and realise their dreams.
The Prime Minister's time has concluded. The member for Boothby has called.
Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Trade, Tourism and Investment. Will the minister update the House on how growth in the tourism industry is supporting jobs for hard-working Australians? How would alternative approaches jeopardise the jobs of hard-working Australians?
The Minister for Trade, Tourism and Investment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And can I thank the member for Boothby for her question, because certainly when it comes to tourism, I know she's very committed, as indeed are many on this side of the House, to growing Australia's tourism industry, because we see it as a super growth sector for this country. Indeed, international visitors going into South Australia have grown by some 18% in the past 3 years. And so not only are more tourists visiting South Australia, they're also spending more, with spending by international tourists up some 41% since 2013 to now reach some $970 million. The fact is that this side of the House is putting record funding into Tourism Australia. This side of the House has been responsible for a tourism boom into this country. And the reason that's important, Mr Speaker, not only is it a point of contrast with the Australian Labor Party, who of course did achieve a record for tourism, and that was record tourism taxes, but the fact is that under the coalition we've seen a growth in numbers, we've seen a growth in length of stay, and we've seen a growth in the average spend. But I hear the member for Boothby asks, are there any threats to the jobs that are being created in the tourism sector? And I'm afraid to say that there are threats to those jobs in Australia's tourism sector, because you cannot go past the electricity policies of the Australian Labor Party. In a recent news.com.au article, Jane Govey of the Bridge Hotel at Langhorne Creek said she had to turn away paying customers. That's what the Labor Party's delivered, where businesses had to turn away paying customers. And she said, and I quote, "We had 20 in for dinner and probably turned another 15 or 20 away. If this had been the only power outage, I'd probably not be quite so upset. But this is the fourth one in 3 months that we've had. Because the simple fact is, Mr Speaker, without electricity, hotels, restaurants, they miss out on paying customers, and that means fewer jobs." But I am pleased that there was actually power on in South Australia yesterday, because it meant they could actually broadcast the Oscars. And I've got to say there are a few envelope stuff-ups yesterday, Mr Speaker. Let me just give a quick recap, because there's no doubt that the Oscar for Best Special Effects should have gone to the former Treasurer, the member for Lilly, the way he made his surplus just disappear. And we could also say, Mr Speaker, that the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor should have gone to the member for Grainler for his role in Get Shorty.
The minister will resume his seat. The Manager of Opposition Business on a point of order.
On direct relevance, Mr Speaker, I think someone gave him the wrong envelope.
The minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'll conclude on this. Coming out of his most recent role as the man with two faces, the Leader of the Opposition should have received the Oscar, because in his renewable energy la-la land, everyone will be living by moonlight.
Does the member for Chifley want to give the member for Gorton a go? The member for Gorton.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Last financial year, Harvey Norman increased its profit by 30% to over $348 million. If the Prime Minister gets his way, it will also receive a generous tax cut. At the same time, the decision to cut penalty rates will mean thousands of Harvey Norman workers will have their pay cut. Is this the Prime Minister's Australia? Taxpayer-funded handouts to big business, but pay cuts for hard-working Australians.
The member for Corangamite is warned. The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, I thank the honourable member for his question, and I assume he's carefully checked that and satisfied that Harvey Norman workers are all covered by a modern award and there isn't an enterprise agreement for Harvey Norman. I'm sure he's carefully checked that. Obviously, he's a former union official, but no doubt we'll establish that. Mr Speaker, the consideration of the Fair Work Commission was a long and elaborate one, and a very complex one. And they considered, for example, whether the public holiday rate in the retail industry should be 250% for all employees. They considered that carefully and they came to the conclusion that it should be 225% for full-time employees, but should remain at 250% for casuals. And so it goes on through a whole series of modern awards, a very complex task, thousands of pages of evidence, hundreds of witnesses. And that is why we support the independent umpire doing this work. The Labor Party has, in the past, and the Leader of the Opposition in particular, has done the same, because he recognised then that it is a careful piece of work to do, and obviously views will differ as to whether, for example, the rate for casuals in the pharmacy industry should be 275% as it has been, or 250% as set in the decision by the Fair Work Commission. There may have been parties before the Commission that argued it should be 225%, and I don't know whether anyone argued it should be 300%. But whatever the process of debate may have been, a careful consideration was undertaken, a very detailed analysis, and that has been the way in which these matters have been dealt with for many, many years. And the Leader of the Opposition has been again and again a supporter of that. He says, for example, in 2015, if there's going to be any debate about penalty rates, it should be done through the independent umpire and through negotiation. Well, we support the independent umpire. There, it's been done, and so should he. And as far as negotiation is concerned, again and again, like if you're a worker for the AWU member for the Melbourne and Olympics Park Trust, you can see that the penalty rates were traded away there. Bill Shorten, State Secretary, Australian Workers Union. Once again, the deal was done. A deal was done to vary the penalty rates as part of an industrial agreement. So there are two ways to deal with penalty rates, says the Leader of the Opposition, one by negotiation, one by the independent umpire, and he should back them.
The member for Fisher.
My question is to the Minister for the Environment and Energy. Will the Minister update the House on what the government is doing to ensure that hard-working Australian families have an affordable and reliable energy supply? How does this compare with alternative approaches that would hurt families and small businesses in my electorate?
The Minister for the Environment and Energy.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Fisher for his question and acknowledge his deep concern for the fruit growers and the nut growers in his electorate who are paying higher prices for their electricity, whether it's strawberries, pineapples, macadamia nuts in the Glasshouse Mountains and in Beerwah. And yes, recently I met with the Irrigators Council, who talked about the higher electricity prices impacting on their business, including the fact that for one irrigation pump station has seen its electricity prices go from $880,000 a year in 2010 to $1.8 million a year this year, more than a doubling of the price. And that's why we are investing record amounts in storage technology. And the Prime Minister's talked about pumped hydro. That's why we're trying to keep sufficient baseload power in the system, and that's why we're railing against the 50% renewable energy targets proposed by those opposite. And just yesterday we saw how confused the Labor Party was about whether or not it would legislate its 50% renewable energy target. Its policy document that it took to the Australian people less than 12 months ago said it would legislate, and then the Leader of the Opposition said last week that they wouldn't. But if that was their only point of confusion, then it would stop there, but it's not. Because now they're also confused about exactly what is their 50% renewable energy target. The member for Sydney was asked by Tony Jones on Q&A last Monday, your 50% renewable target, is that a guaranteed target, or has it now turned into an aspiration based on wishful thinking? The member for Sydney replied, it's not about wishful thinking. This is about putting a price on carbon. So then the Leader of the Opposition backed her up
he's told Emma Alberici we should use market forces to set a price. And I thought to myself, is that Labor's policy? What would the hapless member for Port Adelaide, their official spokesman on energy and climate change, say on this issue? And I discovered this gem of an interview that he did, this gem with Neil Mitchell. This is what the member for Port Adelaide, their official spokesman, told Neil Mitchell. I've described very clearly what our policy is. An ETS without a carbon price, Mr Speaker. You have got a very definitive answer from me, Neil. You know that. There is no price on carbon. That's about as definitive as anyone could be. Mr Speaker, the Labor Party is totally confused. You're not sure if your policy's ambition and aspiration, a goal, a target, a policy objective. You're not sure whether you're going to legislate it or whether you're not. And now you don't even know whether it's a carbon price or it's no carbon price at all. Unfortunately, the Australian people, households and businesses are going to pay the price of your terrible energy policy.
The member for Sydney.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister, and I refer to the Prime Minister's answer to my question yesterday. Does the Prime Minister acknowledge that 77% of pharmacy workers are women? Did the Prime Minister avoid mentioning these workers yesterday because he knows that cutting wages in female-dominated industries will increase the gender pay gap?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr Speaker. Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the honourable member. For her question. As I observed yesterday, relying on the material set out in the Fair Work Commission's report, while there appears to be a majority of female workers in both retail and hospitality, according to the Fair Work Commission, there are somewhat more male workers working on Sundays in both sectors. Now, as to the question about the number in the pharmacy award, that's certainly something that we can take on notice. But the reality is the issue, and the honourable member should give the Fair Work Commission due credit. All of their members were appointed by the Labor Party. The President comes from a lifetime's experience in the Australian Congress of Trade Unions. So there is no question about their background and their experience. They considered very carefully the modern awards objective of maintaining equal rates of pay between men and women for comparable work. And that's one of the objectives of modern awards. They considered that and they concluded that the awards changes they agreed on were appropriate ones. Now, we support the independent umpire doing that detailed work. Now, the people are entitled to have a view about whether a penalty rate, a Sunday loading, should have gone from 275 to 250% or 225%, or from 225% to 200% or 175%. And views will differ about those. There's no doubt about that. But from our point of view, here between the government and the opposition, until very recently, there was a very clear unity ticket, a very clear agreed position that we would support the decision of the independent umpire, which has the expertise and the evidence to examine those matters. And they have come to their decision. It was a reference that was delivered to them. They were requested to undertake by the Leader of the Opposition when he was the Minister. He backed in the independent umpire again and again and again, and simply because he now chooses, for political reasons, to dissociate himself from that decision, he now wants to attack the very independent umpire which his government, previous Labor government, created, which he made the reference to and whose members he supported. No wonder people find the Leader of the Opposition so lacking in consistency, integrity, so lacking in any principles that the Labor Party has stood for so many years.
The Prime Minister's time has concluded. The member for Banks.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Human Services.
Will the minister outline to the House the importance of compliance measures to ensure the integrity of the welfare system? Is the minister aware of any alternative approaches that undermine the integrity of the system?
The Minister for Human Services has the call.
Well, I thank the member for Banks for his question. Of course, welfare compliance measures are critical to ensure that people get the right payments, no more and no less. And we do this by cross-checking the income information that a person self-reports to Centrelink with the income information which the Australian Taxation Office has on file. And when there is a discrepancy, we ask the person to explain it. This work is so important, Mr Speaker, because the unfortunate reality is that some people deliberately defraud the system, while many others inadvertently fail to properly update their income information. And when that occurs, people are getting more than they are entitled to. And our system identifies such people and seeks to recover that money for the benefit of the taxpayer. And I'd like to give the Parliament some examples of such cases. There was one, for example, who was on benefits for all of financial year 11-12, 12-13, a South Australian man who reported $7,000 to Centrelink, but the tax office showed that he actually earned $65,000. Another example, a Victorian woman who was on payments from 2010 to 13 reported $23,000 to Centrelink. The tax office said that they earned $69,000. The final example I'll provide is the best one. It's a Queensland gentleman who was on payments from 11-12 to 12-13. He said he earned $5,000 during that period of time. He actually earned over $100,000. Now, I don't know, Mr Speaker, if you picked up the years that these cases occurred, but they all happened during the Labor years when the member for Sydney was the Human Service Minister, when the member for McMahon was the Human Services Minister and the member for Gorton was the Human Services Minister. None of those ministers picked up those cases, but, Mr Speaker, we are doing the hard work and picking up those cases. Now, I'm asked about alternative approaches, and the Labor Party has been very clear about what they would do if they were back in government, because the member for Barton, the Shadow Minister, has said very clearly, she has said, here's what we would do, here's what we would do. Well, Labor would do exactly what they did in the past. That's what they said. Well, in the past they ignored all of those cases, and now they are promising to do exactly the same again. Egregious cases which they did not pick up. The Labor Party is effectively saying, don't worry, it's someone else's money. Come in, help yourself, we won't do the checks. That's what they did in the past, and that's what they would do in the future if they were back in government. The member for McMahon wants to be the Treasurer in the future. He just disregarded these egregious cases. Should he be Treasurer, he'll do exactly the same thing again, disregard taxpayers' money.
The minister's time has concluded. What are you thanking me for? I haven't called you yet. That's okay. The member for Perth has the call.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. It's reported today that company profits have increased by record amounts, and if the Prime Minister gets his way, these same companies will receive a generous tax cut. At the same time, the decision to cut penalty rates will mean workers at the Morley Galleria shopping centre in my electorate will have their pay cut. Is this the Prime Minister's future for my state in Western Australia? Taxpayer-funded handouts to big businesses but pay cuts for low-paid workers because he supports the decision to cut penalty rates.
The Prime Minister has the call.
So, Mr Speaker, that was a very revealing question. The honourable member described a proposed cut in company tax as a taxpayer-funded handout to business. So that's the view of the Labor Party. They believe that the profits of every business in Australia, every company, basically belongs to the government, and that anything that is left after tax is a handout from the government. Well, I can tell you, we don't take that view. We take the view that the profits that are earned by Australian businesses, whether they are small businesses, mum and dad businesses, whether they're big companies, Those profits have been earned by the investment, the hard work of the team behind them, and when we tax them and should tax them no more than we need to do to meet the requirements of government, and that is consistent with delivering the growth and the employment that we need. And that used to be the view propounded by the Labor Party. It used to be the Leader of the Opposition's view. It certainly still is, unless he's had his book brought back and pulped. It was the member for McMahon's view in his book. The fact of the matter is that they know, and we know, that if you have more investment, you will get more employment. If you have more employment, greater opportunities for Australians. Everything we are doing is designed to improve the prospects for employment for Australians. Exports, investment, business tax cuts, all of those reforms, ensuring that we have affordable and reliable energy. Every element of our economic plan, everything we are doing is designed to ensure Australians have a better prospect to get ahead. Labor, on the other hand, every element of their plan is designed to discourage investment and discourage employment. Higher taxes, higher debt, more expensive energy. And he refers to the penalty rate decision. Now, Mr Speaker, as I said, this is a complex decision covering a number of awards, and there was hundreds of pages of evidence given, thousands of pages, in fact, hundreds of witnesses. It went on for a very long time. It was started when the Labor Party was in government. Very, very complex inquiry. And what we've seen there is a decision which seeks to balance the rate of penalty rates with the desire to increase employment and create more job opportunities. And that's the decision that the former ACTU official, Ian Ross, and the panel, entirely appointed by the Labor Party, have come to. Now, we respect, we support the independent umpire, and we do, and the Labor Party did, and the Labor Party should again, because it is a fundamental foundation of the industrial relations system in Australia.
The Prime Minister's time has concluded. The member for Newcastle will cease interjecting. The member for Forrest has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Urban Infrastructure. Will the minister update the House on the rollout of the government's $50 billion infrastructure investment plan? How is this record investment delivering jobs for hard-working Australians and improving productivity across the country, especially in my home state of Western Australia?
The Minister for Urban Infrastructure.
Well, I do thank the member for Forrest for this question. She's a very strong advocate for improving infrastructure to deliver economic benefit, to deliver employment, to deliver jobs. She's a strong supporter of projects like the Swan Valley Bypass, $648 million of Commonwealth government money, the Tonkin grade separation, 2 parts of the Northlink project, $185 million of Commonwealth government funding, all the projects that were announced in the 2016 campaign, the Ocean Reef Road overpass, $20 million, the Manning Road on-ramp, $20 million, or the Western Australian component, indeed the national elements of the Outback Way, $100 million. And she's also a strong supporter of Perth Freight Link, $1.186 billion of Commonwealth money, a $1.9 billion project, a dedicated and efficient link to the Fremantle port. It will take heavy traffic off of suburban streets in south-western Perth. It will improve safety, a fast, efficient, reliable connection for freight traffic and car traffic. And of course, this project, Mr Speaker, will deliver 2,400 jobs, 2,400 jobs and thousands of indirect jobs.
Minister will just resume his seat for a second. The member for Brand will cease interjecting. Leader of the House will not interject. The member for Grayndler on a point of order.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In order to be relevant, he has to say how freight gets the 3 kilometres between where the road stops and the port.
Will resume his seat. Member for Grayndler will resume his seat. The minister has the call.
Labor's plan. What is Labor's plan for the Perth Freight Link, their plan is to cancel it. Their plan is to turn their backs on 2,400 jobs. And why is that? Because they are more interested in getting the approval of the latte sippers in Carlton and in Fitzroy and in Marrickville and in Fremantle than they are concerned about 2,400 jobs for Australians. And they've got some vaporware proposal to replace it, which hasn't even yet been approved by Infrastructure Australia. We have a plan for Western Australia and we have a plan for the nation, with infrastructure all around the country, a $50 billion infrastructure program which is being rolled out steadily. The Northern Connector in Adelaide, the Darlington project in Adelaide, the Toowoomba Second Range Crossing, the Western Sydney Infrastructure Plan, $3.6 billion, a new M12 to connect from the new Western Sydney Airport opening in 2026 to the M7 and to the Sydney motorway network. The Turnbull government is getting on with delivering infrastructure all around the country because it delivers economic benefit, it delivers jobs. We took the decision to proceed with Western Sydney Airport. We're proceeding for the approvals on that. We've got construction already underway on major road projects to connect to that, like the Northern Road. We are getting on with a $50 million infrastructure program, $1 billion to deliver jobs.
The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'd ask that further questions be placed in the notice paper.
I thank the Prime Minister.